Kevin. How are you doing tonight?
I am doing very well. How are you, Chris?
I'm doing well, and Ryan has some coffee. Are you doing a little better, Ryan?
Doing a little bit better.
Okay.
Thank you for hosting with the coffee.
Oh, absolutely. I'm wearing my Coffee Monster shirt. But Kevin is the designer and Kickstarter extraordinaire local here to Cincinnati for the game Delvers, the Heroes of Farenwald. And he's going to be chatting with us tonight and talking about some of his favorite games and just doing the silly things that we do sometimes, talking about games. I met not Gabe. I met Kevin. Gabe owns this place.
Gabe, I know Gabe.
Yeah, you know Gabe. Yeah. We've talked about Gabe before. But I met Kevin at a local game designer thing here in Cincinnati, and he was kind enough to show off his game. His game has some great artwork, and it's on Kickstarter right now. And when will it be ending the Kickstarter?
The Kickstarter ends October 14th, so there's still quite a bit of time left.
Yeah,
about 20 days.
Yeah, yeah. That's a long time for a Kickstarter. Is it 20 days or is that?
I was just looking at it. I don't know what today's date is.
It's probably close. I would say that at first I was thinking, oh, well, just because the default setting on Kickstarter is 60 days. And I was like, well, that seems kind of long. And so I was going to shorten it to 30, but then I said, let's run it with 40. I wasn't feeling very confident when we were pre-planning when we were going to launch. I was like, well, let's tack on an extra 10 days and see how things have gone. But I've actually been pleasantly surprised with how it's been going so far.
Yeah, I wondered how you came up with your days, because some of the other people I've talked to in the past usually say like go shorter. So
I respect your decision.
I will say that there were, when I was thinking about doing a Kickstarter, and I've said this every time I've talked about the game now, is that, even before Chris, you and I met and I debuted the game, I didn't even know there were other people doing that in Cincinnati. I thought it was like, oh, people are getting together like on the West Coast, and they're forming groups and whatever. I didn't know that there was enough interest here design-wise. So I was really like 80% of the way through developing the game when I first showed it off to you guys. And we had been play testing for about 8 months in the virtual playtest Discord, which, if you're not familiar, is like a group of 10,000 members. And they will play test through your game and give you notes. You can be present, you can not be present, all these kind of things. So I was utilizing them because I was under the very wrong assumption that, hey, there's no designers in Cincinnati, right? And I think I did myself a disservice because I'm not on social media at all. I don't have a face. I do now to promote the game, but that's the only reason I have a Facebook, right? So I didn't know that there was this Cincinnati board design group. And all of you guys just are incredible and have been incredible since that was the first meeting I ever went to, the one where you and I met. So, when thinking about I got off on a tangent, but getting back to the length of the Kickstarter, I really had no idea. I was just reading stuff that Stonemaier Games was putting out. And I was trying to gobble up as much information as I could. And a lot of the same, you read a lot of the same things that you mentioned, Chris, if you go through that material, right? Like run it short because Kickstarter gives you a big boost at the beginning and a big boost at the end. So you want it to be like a flight from Cincinnati to Chicago, right? You go up, you hit 10,000 feet, and you come straight back down. So there's not that lull in the middle. But what I've been using the lull for, and really this whole Kickstarter process for, is a learning experience. Right. So I don't want to say I don't care if it's successful, but to me, the Kickstarter getting $50,000, $100,000 is not the goal of this. The goal of this is to learn how to be a better designer, take some criticism from people who don't like me, that don't know me, that are just seeing something for the first time and being able to say, hey, I think this sucks, or hey, have you given thought to this? Those are the types of things that I'm looking for, really kind of, I don't know, it sounds esoteric, but those are the things that I'm looking for creatively with Kickstarter. So for me, if it's successful and it funds, awesome. But what it means is that it gets to kind of more so convince my wife that I should keep designing stuff, as opposed to, you know, give me permission to create a company and my whole world be designing, and that's just what I do for a living now. That's more what it's a vehicle for, and that's why I chose the length I did, because I've spent this 40 days just learning about how it's been going, and I've been pleasantly surprised.
Before we talk about the Kickstarter too much, for any of our listeners that aren't familiar with Delver's Heroes of Farenwald, can you give me like a quick rundown of it?
Yeah, I've gotten better at this as things have gone on. As you guys can tell, I'm incredibly long-winded. I do sales for a living, so I really can't shut up. But what Delver is, in a nutshell, is it's an introduction to tabletop RPGs, Dungeons and Dragons, Savage World, that kind of, and it creates a unique and safe environment for people to flex their muscles role playing. And I would say it's akin to Sheriff of Nottingham in that way. And then as far as the action in the game, the rounds that get played, how things get handled, it's more like Munchkin in that way. And people say, hey, when you give a description of your game, don't say other games, but that's kind of BS, I think.
I mean, just don't
if
say
a game feels
games.
Yeah, if a game feels like another game, it feels like another game, right? But so players in this game choose a class like you do in Dungeons and Dragons, or and in Munchkin you get to play a class, right? But you pick a class and you're attempting to become the hero of the city of Farenwald first. And the city has this looming dungeon in the background that's kind of wreaking havoc, right? And so you start out as this budding adventurer, barbarian, ranger, alchemist, whatever. And you have a set of stats like you do in a tabletop RPG, but it's really truncated down. You have 5, right? 5: attack, defend, heal, disgust, dexterity. Those are your 5, right? And we use disgust instead of charisma because it kind of breaks that barrier for what am I using charisma for? You know what I mean? Right. When I've tried to teach Dungeons and Dragons to family members, I get a lot of, well, what do I use charisma for exactly? It's like, well,
seduce dragons.
Let's just put it as, let's just put it as disgust, and they'll know, oh, it means how well I talk to people, right? So what we've tried to do is distill it down into its purest form, and we've structured a competitive aspect around it. And I've gotten some feedback that, hey, why'd you make a competitive game when D&D is all about working together? And I really took that to heart. So I designed the competitive aspect first, which is the difficult part. But we have since play tested, and it is now in the official rules, a cooperative version of the game that you can play. And again, I mentioned that this was going to be 30 seconds, and here I am rambling. So it is effectively all of those games rolled into one. You have a dungeon master, and instead of kicking down a door and just fighting something and rolling a die, you're given a scenario, like a tabletop RPG scenario, right? You're supposed to plant a vial of poison in this noblewoman's pocket while she isn't looking. You're to save a farmhand from a cave troll, right? A bunch of merchants have rubble dumped on them and they're screaming for help. What are you going to do? You have to jump across a large chasm to get to a cube. These types of scenarios that can be handled in different ways. As you guys are familiar with tabletop RPGs, 100 different ways to do it. Go ahead and choose whichever way is relevant to you. Act that out, roll a die, and see if you succeed or fail. That's effectively the game.
I like it. It sounds like something I could play at my table.
Yeah.
By my table, I mean the other people's tables because I don't run games. But this sounds like a game I could run.
Yeah, because it has a game master. So the game master's job is to read the scenario cards out to the players. And if you're familiar with a DC check in Dungeons and Dragons, that condition is on the card itself. So you don't have to make it up in your head. You don't have to decide how hard something is. It's right there. And there's a variant rule in the game where if you're familiar with D&D and you play it a lot, ignore that thing on the card altogether. If you feel like, hey, I've DM'd for years, I don't need something on a card telling me what succeeds or what doesn't, and totally fine. Just work within 8 and 14 because that's what the game's balanced around. But other than that, go nuts.
Yeah, I mean, that's like all the prep is just back in your Kickstarter and then bringing it in, and that's, you know, takes all the stress out of Dungeon Master prepping.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, the games, even though, you know, we have 50 total scenario cards, right? We have 25 for the town, 25 for the dungeon. You choose these 2 different areas to delve into. I didn't want it to all be dungeon scenarios because I felt like a lot of that's going to be tooled towards combat narratively, right?
Yeah.
I wanted people to feel like you're also delving into the town and you're defending somebody's honor in court, or you're, you know, subverting a plot against a nobleman or something like that.
Isn't a dump stat.
Yeah, it's not a dump stat. You're right. It's very integral to the game. So I wanted people to be able to experience these kinds of scenarios that you don't often get in games. It's just kind of, hey, there's a big thing in front of you, swing at it. You know, maybe your decision making amounts to what equipment do I have, and that's interesting, right? But I kind of wanted to look at other scenarios outside of just, hey, hit thing with thing, you know?
Right. Right. I mean, because that's the big discussion in D&D right now, right? Because D&D has continued to grow over the last 4 or 5 years, become massive. Is D&D a bottleneck, or is it a gateway to other things? And when I hear about a project like yours, I feel like if nothing else, it's a gateway in that somebody might not want to spend $50 on a source book, but when you finally, I think even if you don't follow through with this version of the Kickstarter, I hope you do, but even if you don't, I think your game is good enough. You're going to be able to bring it to shelves in some form at some point. And I think having a small box thing that somebody can take to a family table or a restaurant or whatever, and it has a much lower price point, is a good thing. And I think that I don't know, I'm rambling now, but I think that we wouldn't be talking about a project like yours if it weren't for D&D, to show my hand a little. But I think that what's great about a project like yours is that it's a lot more accessible to a different group of people.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I designed it. You know, I got into D&D. I played once in high school and I didn't really like it. And I think it's because of the person who introduced me. And oftentimes that's the case, right? You get a DM who's, you know, maybe different style or flavor than what you like. And that's what's also really exceptional about Dungeons and Dragons. The rules are so fast and loose that it can really be played in such a wide variety of ways. One of the first things you read in the Dungeon Master's Guide is, hey, feel free to do whatever you want, actually, because you know, we have these as, you know, think of them more guidelines and actual rules, you know, that kind of feeling when you read those books. And the trouble is, for me, being a new DM and really enjoying that process and having friends at the table, I would go to work and I have, I don't think we've talked about this on the podcast yet, but I have what I'll call a stuffy job. I have to dress up. I meet with business owners, you know, no offense to business owners, they're great people, smart people. But not a lot of them play Dungeons and Dragons, right? And when I'm at work, I am very much myself. I don't hide my nerdiness when I'm at work. So oftentimes I'll have discussions with these folks who are, you know, have really only heard about D&D during the Satanic Panic, or oh yeah, this what my kid, his nerd friend plays, or whatever, right? So I'll explain these stories that we walk through in our D&D campaign on Sundays and say, this is what happened. Can you believe it? This is why I really love this game. And they'd be like, that sounds so awesome. Like, how do I play? Right. I've had that asked to me a couple times. Yeah. And so I'll go into it like, okay, so you need to buy at minimum the player's handbook, right? And then you need to read through. And then as soon as you start talking about, here's this backlog of things you have to do, and here's this character sheet that looks like an Excel spreadsheet if somebody threw paint on it, and here's all this, they immediately pull back. Like, okay, that sounds like something for you, doesn't sound like something for me. The scenario's fun, that part sounded cool, but everything else you said, no thank you, right? So the whole point in designing this game was, okay, don't pull back. Just here's this box. Let's pull out some cards and I'll show you what it is, right? I'll read a scenario, you look at what you have, roll, and we'll see whether you succeed or fail, right? Yeah. Because in its purest form, that's what D&D is, So that's exactly why I designed the game.
Yeah. So besides D&D, and you mentioned Savage Worlds earlier, what other types of things are you playing, or have you been playing in the last couple of years that helped provide some inspiration for this game? Oh man, I have been playing games since I could hold a controller and pick up a rule book. So I'm not kidding you when I tell you, I mean, you guys can see the arcade machine behind me. That has 800 games in it between Game Boy Advance, Sega Mega Drive, arcade. There's a PS5 and a Switch behind me. In the next room is my board game shelf with probably dozens upon dozens of games. I really love games in all their forms, whether it's, video games or tabletop games or RPGs. And what I've always loved is the narrative aspect of games. So for me, it's my whole life has been games of Magic the Gathering and D&D and Savage Worlds and Baldur's Gate and Diablo 2 and World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy and all of these different worlds and all of these different mediums in which we interact with them. That has been, my life, my passion, my hobby. Since I was 5 years old, probably. When did the N64 come out? 1995. That was the first console I had. Okay. And I was born in 89. I was born in 89. So I was probably 5 years old. So I've really been loving games since then. But the spark to design didn't come, and this is to your point, Chris, until I started playing D&D. Because D&D gives you the permission to break it, and it really incentivizes you to create, because you build your own world, right? I think a lot of DMs tend to build their own world if they have the time, and if they love narrative, they're probably gonna try and write something, right? And even if they're not building their own world, creating their own weapon or their own magical item sounds cool. And even if they're not doing that, they're creating a character from scratch and writing a backstory and thinking about how that character fits into the world, right? So it gives you permission to be creative. The whole game is designed around that. So when I was, first started being a DM, I was afraid to touch those things. And then I kept doing it. And I really loved that process. And I think that's something that Dungeons and Dragons doesn't get enough credit for, is, 5th edition has been so welcoming to new players. The addition of that and things like Dimension 20 and Critical Role having this mass appeal, those things have really gotten people into the space. And then once you get into the hobby, even if it's something like Savage World or other RPGs, those tools give you the permission to be creative as well. So I think a lot of would-be designers maybe
started out through that medium, or at the very least through board games, right?
Yeah.
What Savage World settings have you been playing in, if any?
What's the Western one? The
Deadlands?
Western, what's that? Deadlands.
Deadlands.
Yes, Deadlands is the one that I've played quite a bit. What I love in that game design wise is the initiative mechanic with drawing cards.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's so cool.
I like Savage Worlds a lot.
Yeah, as soon as somebody, I also love that the dice can blow up. Talk about adding drama. Like, I didn't know that you could add more drama to a die roll than you could in D&D, right? Once the narrative stakes get high and you get bought in. But Savage World takes that up to 11 because your dice can just start like a slot machine. They could just start going off.
Can't stop hot dice.
Yeah, it's so cool. Those two mechanics in particular, I really like. I don't know if this is in the Savage Worlds book, because I play Savage Worlds as a player. I'm not a game master, so I don't know the system as well as I probably should. But I love how Magic has a drawback in Deadlands. That's something that's that's something that I think is really great, because Magic is something that's ubiquitous in D&D, right? Oh, everybody's popping magic all over the place, and you can have low magic settings, but the way D&D is written in all the magical items, there's magic all over the place, right? But I love the fact that there's a drawback in Savage World, that it's pulling something from your essence to draw out that much power. That to me narratively is super cool. We have something in our current campaign where there's a sect of mages that are trying to amplify magic even further, and it's killing them by the act of doing that. And I love that idea.
My character just died in our Savage Worlds games. We're doing riffs, and I made a new character, and my character was very beloved, and my new character was just just no one's ever, literally, they're just like, I just miss your old character, man. It's always, my character was a lot of fun to play. It was a 14-foot tall, muscular Pikachu, but yeah,
I didn't know he died.
Yeah, so Savage World's dice, just real fast, rolling dice. My character, every time I roll a 1, they get a little closer to dying, but the dice get bigger.
Right.
So I've gone from D6s, rolled a couple 1s, to D8, rolled a couple 1s,
gotcha,
down to a D10. I'm a juicer. I rolled a 1 a couple weeks ago, and then 2 sessions ago, I have a D10. I roll it, and I roll a 1. And I'm like, all right, well, I've got a D12. So the next round of combat, I was like, well, I'll roll it again, because like, what's the likelihood that I'll roll a 1 like right back to back on a D12 from a D10? And then my character died.
Wow.
Well, at the end of the session.
Yeah.
And it's like the only way that they could die and not come back, and just big sads.
Yeah.
It's tough when characters die. It's always tough.
I like to explore that, make people feel bad.
Yeah.
He didn't say goodbye because he didn't care. He lived to die.
You mentioned that some board games have taken you to some of those places too. What board games are those that have helped you work through some of your design ideas too? So that we're talking about, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's a few. I think Munchkin was a big part of that. I don't think Munchkin is a very well balanced game. I'll say that. I think Steve Jackson is a very good designer. But I think Munchkin, if you play it, it's not a very well designed game. And I think that there are ways to house rule it to make it awesome, and I think that was my first kind of step into wanting to design a game, because D&D had given me permission to change that. And then we were playing Munchkin, and I was like, well, why don't I just change everything we play? We got a chance to, why not? And so house ruling that. House ruled a little bit of King of Tokyo, cut my teeth on that. I really like push your luck games. I know there are some board game lovers out there who are like, no randomness at all. I want to know exactly what I have to do and what I'm going to do. The correct amount of moves, the constructed deck player in Magic the Gathering, if you will, wants no amount of randomness. And I understand that, you know, I want no randomness in a strategic game too. I understand that. But I also just love the feeling of having friends at the table and giving them crap for rolling the best roll of their life over and over and over, and never letting them live it down how lucky they are, not skilled, right? Those types of things are funny to me. Yes, I lost the game, but I like when my mom wins in King of Tokyo when she has no idea what she's doing. I like that. I think that's what gets people into games, is winning them, right? If every game had no bout of randomness, the people who are introducing that game to them are just going to destroy them every time. And people who lose games don't want to continue playing them.
Christopher loves playing games still.
Oh man! See, that's what I'm talking about. Give people a hard time at the table. It's always fun. So yeah, King of Tokyo. I am a huge fan of one of the first board games I ever played that got me into board games that are not Sorry and Monopoly and stuff like that was Forbidden Island and Forbidden Desert. And then of course Pandemic. I think Matt Leacock is a phenomenal designer, and I think it's because he over play tests the heck out of his games. Even admittedly so. He mentioned that he was making changes to Pandemic, like I think it was a couple weeks before the kind of hit go. And I like that philosophy. I've always said even with my game with Delver, you know, let's say the Kickstarter funds and then all the backers are like, this sucks, you got to change it. Sure. I totally fine with that. I'm not married or too rigid to, you know, I don't want to, the only thing I think I'm rigid on is I don't want to add complexity. There's been a lot of play testers, especially people who love tabletop games and have played a ton of tabletop games and RPGs, have play tested the game and said, man, you should add this and this, and you should add feat cards, and you should have this thing and this thing. And it's like, yeah, that's all great, but the whole reason the game's designed is because it's easy, you know. So we don't want to add too much complexity, but yeah, I'm not married to any of the design elements in the game. If it's going to make it better, it's going to make it better, you know.
Kevin, I have fake beef with Steve Jackson, so I've made a couple scoffing noises when you bring up Munchkin and stuff. It's not real beef, but I like to pretend like I'm a snob. I mean, I am a snob, but I just want to let you know that I'm not. It's just it's an act. So every time you say Munchkin, I go, oh.
I don't know if it is an act, but it's okay.
Well, I mean, I do think
it's currently an act.
There's some real criticism against Steve Jackson games, but what you can't deny is that they're very well marketed and they have been very successful. I think one thing that Steve Jackson is good at is making games that are easy to pick up and play. Munchkin, Zombie Dice, these games are easy to pick up and play. And I think that we can get, and I'm not accusing you of this, of course, but as board game players who play a ton of board games and play really tightly, very well-designed games like the ones Matt Leacock makes, are going to play a Steve Jackson game and go, wow, that was different, right? But it doesn't mean that his games are bad. It means that they're not for the type of player that plays Forbidden Island.
It's like his games aren't bad, just the people who play them are.
Yeah, kidding. True.
I'm teasing everybody. I've played a lot of Steve Jackson games. I've met Steve Jackson. This is all a joke.
I think the only one I still own personally is Ogre, but that's a different story.
He lost money on the Ogre Kickstarter because it was his dream to re-release it big. And I respect a man going into a project knowing that he's a passion. If you have a passion project that's not like, get more money, but like an actual, I respect that. So yeah, sorry. Yeah.
And that same to me, I know, Chris, you mentioned if I choose not to, I mean, I'm going to relaunch it with a lower goal if it's not successful. I think it will be because we're in the RPG room at Sin City Con. So I'm going to be
Oh, nice. Cool.
hamming it up with a lot of the tabletop RPG guys and gals all weekend long. And I do think that everybody who plays the game and everybody who knows what it's trying to do goes, yeah, we need something like this. You know, this is something that's great. You know, those people that I've introduced the game to have kind of agreed on that and have loved the game. So I think I just need to get it in front of more people, and I need to be better at that. You know, that's part of my learning through this process. Is my marketing has been horrid. It really has. And you know, and it's okay for me to realize that. You know, I've got a full-time job that's like, you know, 50 hours a week. And so, and I have no experience in marketing stuff like this. I just made something that I think was cool, and tried to get it in front of people, and I'm learning. But for me, if there's and this sounds kind of hokey too, but it's true, you know, if there's 10 people that like it, and it introduces, you know, 2 or 3 into tabletop RPGs, and I think the game's done its job. You know, it's a first time journey for me, so I don't have any delusions about everybody just picking up and going, this is the best thing ever. You know what I mean? I just want it to hit somebody. This
is designed to replace WotC's control over Dungeons and Dragons. This is the new Kevin. You've heard it first on the Board Again Gaming podcast. Kevin's plans for Delvers, Heroes of Farenwald, is to replace Dungeons and Dragons permanently.
Here's what I'll say too, is that I've learned, and a lot of this is through the Cincinnati design game group, and through the people I've met through this whole process, talking about board game design, reading and listening more about board game design, talking with more players, is that I just really love designing games. Even if those games suck, I just really love the process of designing games. And that has been some of the most fun I've had in years, has been going through. I wonder if I can share my screen with you guys. So, I can't share my screen. You have it disabled, but you're fine. But what I'll say is I have this screen over to my left. I have 2 screens here. Maybe I can move this to show you real quickly. I have this spreadsheet of a new card game I'm designing. Yeah. And there's 200 lines in this spreadsheet. And I've been working on a new game before this Kickstarter is even over. Just to kind of pass the time, and just because I've found that whole process has been so fun.
That's awesome. So what how would you like to see you've talked about it some, but how would you like to see the world of tabletop gaming grow in the next few years?
I'm going to draw a line in the sand, and there's going to be some listeners that disagree with me here, but I'd like to see us get away from app-driven games, and kind of get back to the table, because a lot of the games that are coming out now, not all of them, but there's some that are like, hey, we have this board game we designed, but you can really only play it if you have a tablet over here. And I understand the use of that because it's so flexible. Like, a lot of the games that do that, it would be hard to do it any other way, right, than to use a tablet or a phone or something like that. Right. But the games I've played that have had them, it's taken me, it's almost like, why isn't this just a video game? It's this weird blend of these two things. Or the app doesn't really do anything at all, and it's easier just to play without it, or it's janky or whatever. I like the ideas that get thrown into them. But I think that the board gaming has grown so much. The industry has really just kind of taken off, and it's captivated more people. More people have started playing more diverse board games, I think. And this might be anecdotal experience, but there are a lot of folks that I would never peg as someone who really enjoys tabletop games, who have played Pandemic, Settlers of Catan, the big ones. But they've played a board game that's not Mousetrap or Checkers,
Right.
And I think that, I don't know, I don't want to speak too disparagingly of app-driven games, but I think that app-driven games kind of takes it in a different direction. Board games, that is, because it tools them more towards a different medium, and I think it cheats a little bit as a designer. If you're designing a game and you say, okay, I really want this experience, okay, how do I do this with meeples and a board and some cards, right? Game pieces. You say, well, if I did these 3 mechanics on an app, then that streamlines the whole process. And it does. And for a lot of games, it does. But it takes away the player's agency then to handle that random element or, manage it at the table. And you take an action away from something you could give the players and put it onto an app. So I think of it as taking away player agency in some games. And there are some games that do this integration well. I'm not saying it's a wholly negative thing. Few things are absolutes, as the Scythe would have you believe. But I do think we have to get away from the hand-holding of app-driven games. What do you guys think? You think I'm just blowing smoke here?
Games at all, ever? Only praise. I don't like.
Just a straight length.
Christopher turned off screen sharing because I accidentally shared my screen like 6 times. I can't. I had to borrow my kid's tablet and have them turn it on. I can't do an app game. Come on.
That's not true. No, it's just because it's the default setting. That's why screen sharing's off.
Because I shared and I was watching while we were recording a podcast one time. I was actually watching another board gaming podcast.
It's recording the current one and just watching another.
Yeah, he was like, "Are you distracted?" And I was like, "Oh no!" And I tried to turn it off, and I shared the screen, and then it was just like, and he was like, "You told me you don't even watch Nick and Star Carla."
Nick and Star.
Yeah, and I was like, I just just
had him on background noise.
Wait, were you seriously watching it?
No, I'm making everything.
Oh, okay,
I never told the truth ever.
This sounds like an alternate reality, but the more you talk about it,
good.
Either it's a bigger lie or okay.
Yeah, it's all eyes all the way down.
I don't know. I think about things like Cryptid. Like I've played almost all the cards in Cryptid. So having the app adds a lot there. I love what Direwolf has done with their apps alongside games. I really enjoyed when I got to play Journeys in Middle Earth. It could have been a video game, but the fact that I sat down and picked out my cards with somebody, it reminded me the mechanics and the way the game was brought together reminded me of what's the one that was huge on X? Since you say like video games, there was that game that was huge on Xbox, and there was like a couple versions of it.
XCOM.
No, there was like a fantasy game where you got to create your character and everything else, and you had a party.
Morrowind.
Yeah.
Elder Scrolls, Morrowind, Oblivion, those kind of games.
So I felt like the benefit to Journeys in the Middle Earth versus playing a video game like that was that I got to sit down at the table and like we got to joke about it and got to joke about all the cards and everything. And that, so like the app, it was somewhat predictable and it was somewhat forcing me in a certain direction. But with the amount of cards there were and everything else, I actually liked the streamlining. So for me, when it's done well, I think it's an 8. I'm more of a person that when it comes to tabletop gaming, if it's something that brings people together, that's what the gaming experience is about for me.
Yeah.
So
I
I disagree.
And you're right. You're right on the money. I mentioned as much that, you know, it can be done and is done well in a few games. I think as I've met with more like new designers who are, hey, I'm working on this. These are the things I'm working on. I've had a lot of conversations about, you know, games they're going to release or games they're prototyping and play testing them. And they're taking elements that I think could be at the table pretty easily and be put in the player's control and putting it onto a tablet. I think that's the real sin. And it doesn't mean that every game does it. It just means that, you know, if you want to handle an element easily, an app is a great way to do that. If you want to add atmosphere, an app is a great way to do that. There's this haunted house game that's an app-driven experience that walks you through a house and describes the room you're in. I forget the name. It's not coming to me. But I absolutely love that game because I love narrative-driven experiences, and you couldn't have that without that app. Because you couldn't have the voice-acted scenario, right? You couldn't have the music in the background. And, you know, those are all the things I love about D&D too. I think it's where, you know, you take an action that could be done by a player and you put it in an app. And I think I'm seeing a lot of that in conversations with current designers where it's like, well, this is just too hard to work around. It's way easier to just have this system do it for me, which they're not wrong. It just removes a thing the player could do.
I've never played a board game that has an app, and I think
that's not true.
What? I've never played a board game with an app. What game did I play with an app?
Arkham Horror. Is that the one?
I never played Arkham Horror with an app. By the time that they released the first app game that I was aware of was Betrayal 2nd Edition or whatever.
Or maybe it was Betrayal. No.
Didn't play it.
You played with us one night.
Nope.
James and everybody.
Nope. Was it a co-op? I don't play co-ops.
I think it was one.
So haven't. I know for a fact that I haven't, and I agree with Christopher though. Anything that brings people to a table, app or no app or whatever, tablet, I support that as long as I don't have to sit at the table and play with you guys. Keep your technology, your government surveillance away from my table. I've got my phone right here.
Get it out.
You know what I mean.
I think it's a quirk. Apps are. I don't think it speaks to the larger board game industry. I think you just gave me a platform to complain about app-driven games for a second. But your question was about the larger, broader, right?
The question is how do you want to see it grow? But I mean, you did make me think of this terrible game that I haven't seen in a while.
We don't disparage games on this podcast.
No, I totally will. I can't think of the name of it, but like you had these miniatures that were.
That you
like have this hollow thing with the miniatures, and
there was
deeply discounted a couple
man.
times.
Oh yeah,
it was like
bad.
a board game. Or it was like a card game and it like hooked up to a game console also, right?
But you needed an iPad when they first released it. And like iPads were like really, really expensive at that time. Because I saw it at Gen Con when they were demoing it before it came out. This was a long time ago. And I was like,
it's such a neat idea, but it's like in concept, it's a neat idea, right? Because you can imagine, I don't know if you guys have seen the Yu-Gi-Oh anime where they're like playing the card games and like the monsters come alive in front of them. That would actually be really cool if it was done right.
No, I hate it.
You know what I mean?
I mean,
it's like VR glasses, maybe. I would
different when there's like a big plastic contraption with a camera pointing down at a plastic sleeved insert, and it's all crinkly and folded because you had to unfold it and set it in there, and then you have to set all the pieces on top, and the camera catches it wrong because it's all plastic and bent around how the camera's picking up the objects. That's how it makes it jank. But if you could throw out 2 discs left and right in your living room and this cool monster just apparates in the middle of your space, that would be cool.
10 points to Kevin for using apparate.
But to sorry, but to get back to your how do I want to see it grow? I'd love to see it continue to take off as it has been. I'd love to see creation in industries that some people want to shy away from. One of those being trading card games. So we have the big three: Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, and Yu-Gi-Oh! And there have been games that have been created outside of that, Force of Will, and Duel Masters, these types of games. But nothing has really survived like a 2-year growth period. They've kind of gotten to a point and then fell off again into obscurity. And because of that, as more time goes on with those big three existing and being, kind of knockout franchises and continuing to grow, and new creators attempting to get there and dying off in a few years, industries like that are hesitant to, new games are hesitant to be created in that space. So that's one I would like to see continue to grow and have a great scene and have more designers designing trading card games, because I love the strategic aspect of those.
I'm going to tell you real fast. Do you know the barrier to entry for like what prevents people from jumping in to try to upset that market is the fact that the Martin Shkreli invested in Magic cards. So when you buy Pokemon, Magic, or Yu-Gi-Oh, there's a good chance that your cards will hold value in 10 to 20 years. Where if you played Legend of the Five Rings by Alderac Entertainment Group for 15 years, you might take a 30, 50-gallon garbage bag to Gen Con and meet a guy in the lobby that you're friends with from Chicago and give him your entire collection that you collected over a decade because it's worthless. So for people trying to upset that market, it's like, because I like CCGs, but that's something that a lot of people don't realize is that Magic, WotC spent a lot of time and energy to make certain that their game didn't turn into a bubble and burst. One of the original designers apparently had a bad experience, got burned on some Beanie Babies, and he didn't want to have the same experience when he was controlling Magic, and that's why they have the it's set up the way that it is so that they don't But I do agree that there should be more CCGs. I just think that
I love the Transformer one. We had a lot of fun teaching people that one and sharing it, and then that one just died really fast. It made a little bit longer than 2 years, but now Renegade's coming out with their deck building game, so I guess there's that. Would probably
I think it's something where I wish more people would step in outside of attaching a franchise to it. Like there's the Final Fantasy trading card game, which I think is well designed. And nobody had to buy a license for that because Square Enix developed it in-house.
Right.
So they don't have to pay licensing fees and things like that. But there's been, I want to say, 8 Star Wars trading card games created over the years since like 1995. They've all floundered in 2 to 3 years. And I think some of that, you mentioned, Magic and Wizards having some control over how strong the brand is. But, Wizards of the Coast has attempted to release other trading card games since then and failed using the same strategy. It's really the players that decide how great the game is. If you think about, I don't know how much you guys know about Magic the Gathering, but the initial set had something called the Power 9 that had Black Lotus in it and a number of other cards that were just absolutely overpowered as all get out. And Richard Garfield, who designed that game, was a mathematician by trade. I think he's a PhD. And he very clearly said in an interview, he knew those cards were overpowered, but they were fun to play. And he didn't expect the game to go gangbusters like it did. Right. I mean, when they put that game in front of people, they just gobbled it up. And they were out of print, quicker than they could blink, really. And so everybody asked him, like, hey, you're a mathematician. You talked about being a mathematician designing this game, and all these cards are broken. And he's like, yeah, I knew they were broken when we put them in, but they were fun, and I didn't expect millions of people to buy our game.
Richard Garfield does love random.
Oh yeah.
And he's also the great grandson of the president, James Garfield.
I mean, you wouldn't have King of Tokyo and Budding Kingdom if he didn't love random. So
the new one with the Keyforge.
And Keyforge.
Yeah, man, what a great idea. What a
absolutely
Richard Garfield just taking people's money.
Keyforge.
Oh, you hate Keyforge?
Keyforge. I think Keyforge is terrible in its design premise, because here's the thing. Here's what I'll say. I'll get on a soapbox for just a second.
We don't disparage games here, Kevin.
If you are designing a trading card game and I want to come over to your house and bring my deck of cards, and you bring your deck of cards, and we're going to go to the park and play on a picnic table like I did with Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic when I was a kid, then all you had to do is throw your deck in your pocket and go to the picnic table, right? With Keyforge, you've got this marker and this token and this marker and these markers. What are you going to do? Bring a plastic baggie with you? I mean, come on. As a travel companion trading card game, this thing will never survive. Mark it down here. It will never continue, because if you can't throw a 50 card deck in your pocket, in your cargo shorts, as a young teenage guy or gal, and go to the picnic bench at your local park and play the game with your friends, then it's not a game that's going to keep growing. I mean, there's so many tokens in this. It's not a CCG. It's a board game. You have to pack it in a cardboard box.
The thing is the decks are only 20 cards, so that space for the 30 extra cards is where you put all your tokens in your pocket.
Get out of town. They're going to get lost in the grass in Oklahoma somewhere, and somebody's going to go, I don't have enough tokens for my deck. And
you just use pennies. Who are these uninspired gamers?
I
feel like there's too many strings.
I don't think that's ever happened, that somebody isn't able to get some kind of tokens.
Well, I think you're probably playing with a lot of adults, but the way card games grow is in cafeterias and high school lunchrooms. That's how trading cards. That's how trading card games grow. Is you get them hooked when they're kids and they're in school, and then they grow up and they get big girl jobs and then buy your stuff in droves. That's how trading card games get crazy.
I mean, I used to have a customer who would come in and buy 3 or 4 cases a week of Keyforge.
Yep. Yeah.
Of Keyforge.
Yeah, so that guy loves that game. And 10 years from now, when no kid has touched it in a lunchroom, they're going to be like the Legend of the Five Rings cards at the at the convention.
Well, I mean, we'll see.
Thank you for bringing that full circle. I appreciate it. He's going to have a garbage bag of Keyforge, and he's going to be meeting some guy.
And here's the thing. I think Keyforge is an incredible game and very well designed. But I think that those tokens and bits and bobs that come with it, that's what kills it, in my opinion.
Well, I guess you guys both missed the news. Last week, FFG announced that they were putting Keyforge on hold to rewrite the algorithm because the algorithm was broken.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they have an AI. They have an AI actually built-in balance for the game.
Yeah,
and that was busted. I actually did read that. Yeah. I don't think that's the reason the game's going to die, though. I think it's get rid of the tokens. Pokemon has too many. If you've ever played Pokemon when you were a kid, every Pokemon set you play comes with a heads or tails die and a bunch of markers for damage. And literally nobody uses them because it's a hassle to carry them around.
That is true, man. Those tokens, those so papery. I will say Keyforge's biggest marketing benefit is the fact that it's $10. It's fun to play sealed. So like for kids and stuff, you know, because you can't build your own decks. So you just have like different decks. And then you're like that guy with the, you know, that buys a case. Yeah. But it's like the barrier to entry for Keyforge is so exceedingly low. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then they've even other aspects, but really that, like if I owned a game store, I would try to push a Keyforge night as hard as possible because I feel like that is just free money.
And
you're just like, hey man, we're gonna.
And I've been disparaging it, but the game is incredibly fun and deep to play.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you disparaging.
It's not. it is a very fun. I love trading card games, and Keyforge is very fun. When I'm envisioning my card game youth, I don't envision carrying tokens around with me, and
Well,
I
you
just
don't get deck
don't
construction.
think that. Yeah, and you don't have this lay out all the cards, sort them by color, sort them by type, kind of. All right, am I doing this? Am I doing that? Which would take up hours when I was a
Well,
kid.
like just
And I'm not saying
ignoring your
that
whole
kills.
class.
And I'm not saying that kills Keyforge, because I think that's actually a benefit. Now in my older age, I love the dual decks of Magic the Gathering, where it's just this one and this one are both balanced against each other. Load them up and play, because I think constructed play is actually kind of it's the most unfun part of Magic, because one guy just plays solitaire for 20 minutes as he rolls out his combo that he spent $1,000 on, and you just sit there and watch it until you die. And I kind of think that's really not fun at all. But
as a competitive
the way
card gamer, oh sorry, I was gonna say, as a competitive card gamer, 100% we're allowed to disparage high-end Magic players.
Yeah, and I think that that's a benefit that Keyforge has, is that, hey, these two decks are balanced, go at it. That nobody's broke the code on, this combination and this combination. Sealed play and limited formats in Magic have been my go-to for the past 10 years now. So that's all I play, and I think Keyforge does that well. I just don't think a game with little cardboard pieces with kids is gonna go over well. It'd go over well with adults for sure, but so does a lot of toys.
If you play in their tournaments, man, I've seen the tokens. They have like really nice enamel tokens that you can win if you like grind or spend a whole bunch of money at the FFG thing. I don't play in FFG tournaments. They've always been very poorly ran in my experience. But those bougie tokens were really nice. Like those are, I like the baubles.
Yeah, as I get older, I find myself going, I never need that thing, to being like, oh, that's really cool. I could have that and just let it sit there on a shelf somewhere.
This custom set of dice, or I don't need more dice. Let me buy more dice. JK Magic players, you're all great.
Yeah, no, Magic is it serves so many different people, is the benefit I think Magic the Gathering has. And I think, to get back on topic, I think that if somebody is going to create a game with as much reach as something like Yu-Gi-Oh or Pokemon or Magic the Gathering, you have to make sure that it's accessible for everybody, has multiple different formats of play, and is easy to digest and get into. I think that's actually something that Yu-Gi-Oh breaks the mold with. If you guys are familiar with that card game, is it's so hard to learn what the heck is going on in that game. Yep. But it doesn't stop new players from playing it, and it doesn't stop them from being wildly successful. So they're very unique in that way. Whereas I think Magic and Pokemon do a much better job of getting new players into the hobby. Yeah. I think it'd have to be a combination of a lot of those things. And I think that I want to see more designers tackle that part of I'm saying all this too, because the card game I'm designing is a CCG. So I'm trying that mountainous task. Good thing I don't, right now, it's all just paper to me that I cut out and put in Magic sleeves to play test with. But I think that we should be challenging and creating new design environments for things that people don't want to touch, or things that people are disinterested in. I think right now, the other problem and the other way I want to see it grow is to get away from insanely complex games. I love games like Scythe and all these games where the box is huge and it weighs 50 pounds and there's all these different pieces and things that come with them. Those are awesome, but these games are, they're a house to learn. They're a house to unpack. And it's a lot to manage. And I understand that that's attractive for a lot of people because, look, I play D&D. I love miniatures. Throw miniatures in the game all you want. I will probably buy it. But that, to me, it can scare away new players. And to me, it's like, are the only games that are getting made these complex messes of 50-pound box games? The answer to that is no, because you have games like Everdell and some of these other games that have come out.
Delvers, Heroes of Farenwald.
Delvers is simple. Dixit is literally just pictures of cards. There are games that are simple, but I feel like a lot of the games that more and more often, I feel like a lot of the games I'm running into are feel like, and they probably aren't, but they feel like they're complex for complexity's sake, or they feel like they have so much added to them to bump up a Kickstarter goal or to add a reward tier, as opposed to this is how the game was designed. You know what I mean? Instead, it feels like, oh, we designed this element to give you oversized man children more toys to buy, which can be part of how they're marketing, and it works. I'm not saying it doesn't work, because
man,
it works. It works on me, so I know it works. But I just would like to see people come away from that.
Yeah,
we've had
because you're incentivized. Yeah, you're incentivized to do that on Kickstarter and GameFound.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like, I'm not always a big fan of miniatures in games. I've stated that. But also, if I was designing the game through a publishing company and they wanted to put they were like, hey, we're going to put some miniatures in your game. You down with that? I'd be like, yes, that sounds amazing. Because it makes it more, it's not just, like it's prestige, Yeah.
And for a while, Delver had a board, and it had miniatures, because I was using miniatures from the D&D campaign to like represent characters. And it was basically like, if you were in the town, you flip the board over to this. And if you were in the dungeon, you just flip the board over to the other side. And then you pick one of these areas in the dungeon to go after. But it became more and more apparent as we were designing it that you didn't really need that. We were just doing it because it was cool. We weren't doing it because it fit the design of the game. We were just doing it because, it's really neat to flip it back and forth all the time and to have minis, but you didn't need it. So we cut it.
Yeah.
So Kevin, Delvers, Heroes of Farenwald is going to you're going to become the new Gary Gygax with that one. And then your next game, you're replacing Richard Garfield. Is the thing. So you're and then after that, I think you are going to slow it down, go to the roots, and become the next Bobby Fischer.
Uwe Rosenberg.
He's going the Euro route. I got it. No, I respect these lofty goals.
Yeah, I think the reality is, I love the joke, but I think the reality is that we're going to spend hopefully get a lot of people into tabletop RPGs with Delver, and I'll have a lot of really fun games of this jank CCG I've played before we even do art of it. I'll bring a couple decks to Sin City Con, Chris, so we can play and you can tell me how crap it is. But yeah, I think that's where my journey is right now, is just having fun with designing. And I know we're getting close on time. I don't want to run you guys off the track here.
No,
that's me. That's my fault.
Anything else you want to say before we wrap things up?
Well, I do want to say thank you guys so much for having me on the podcast. It's been a pleasure to talk with you guys and have you listen as I ramble on. But I also say to anybody that's interested in introducing friends or family members into tabletop RPGs, I'm biased, but I think Delver Heroes of Farenwald is a great way to do that. If you want to check us out on Kickstarter, searching Delver should bring us up right away. And if you want to get a taste of the game and look at that, there's a tabletop simulator version. You can see all the art on Instagram. We're not hiding the art behind Kickstarter goals or anything like that. The game's already done. So from an art perspective, so all the art's up on our Instagram page. You can take a look at that before you dive in. But thank you guys so much again.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin.
Delving into your Instagram here in a minute.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
We'll catch you later.
See ya.